So when you add your CSS and JavaScript to your website using Beaver Builder, there's a lot of different places that you can add it. First one is when you're editing a page and you go to Tools, and then Layout, CSS and JavaScript, you get a CSS box and a JavaScript box. Alternatively, if you go to Tools and then Global Settings, you also have CSS and JavaScript. Now on top of that, you also have the CSS files within your theme, so your style.css, and then you can also add CSS using plugins and JavaScript using plugins. You can add CSS and JavaScript to your website in WordPress in so many different ways, so it's extremely important to know where it all goes when a page is rendered. You know, if you add your CSS, is it loaded up the top of your website or is it loaded down the bottom of your website? Because a cascading style sheet or a .css file is like a waterfall. So a waterfall cascades from the top to the bottom as the water flows down. And that is exactly how CSS code works. Your code flows from the top of your website, so any CSS codes that is added up here, and then it just keeps going down. So if you add CSS at the bottom, that would take precedence over the CSS code loaded in the head of your website. And that is exactly what we're going to discuss in this video. When we add our CSS and JavaScript using Beaver Builder, where does it go on our page? And let's go through that right now. So let's start off with the global CSS. The global CSS and global JavaScript in Beaver Builder, you can add that by going to Tools, and then Global Settings, and then there's the CSS and JavaScript. Now, something to point out here is that anything added in the global settings gets loaded on every page that is using Beaver Builder. So if we add some code here and click Save, this JavaScript code would load on every single page. So for example, if we did text color, text highlight, and we did background red, color white, we're saying anything that has this class will have a red background with white text, and we might just give it some padding. So this, again, this CSS is in the global settings. So let's save that. And then let's add it to this subheading. And you can see that has affected that there. And let's click Done and Publish. Okay, so this is the About page. Let's just go to another page, so maybe FAQs, and click Page Builder. And then go back into the global settings, and then CSS, and you can see it's there again on this other page, which means we have the ability to use that CS class again. So on this text here, we could add that CSS class in the Advanced tab here, and that text has gone red. Okay, so that's how the global CSS and JavaScript works. JavaScript would work exactly the same. You could add some JavaScript code to every page on your website. Now let's look at that, so the global CSS and JavaScript versus the layout CSS and JavaScript. So let's go ahead in the layout CSS and JavaScript, and let's add a new CSS class. And we might do text green. And we'll do background green, color white. And we'll give it some padding as well. Okay, so anything that has this CSS class here will have a green background with white text and have some padding. Now remember, this is in the layout CSS. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's just add it to this here. So the Advanced tab, and let's just add it here, and that has worked. And you can see this actually isn't changing color because I've defined it here. So let's just say hello. Actually, it's taking the color from the theme, but that would turn white. So all we have to note is that class that we added to add the green background, that has worked here. Okay, now let's click Done and Publish Changes. And now let's go back to the About Us page. So this is the page that we edited first. And let's launch Beaver Builder. And then let's go to Tools. And then Layout Settings, so Layout, CSS, and JavaScript. And you'll see for this page, that CSS has not been added. So what can we take away from this? We can take away that the layout, CSS, and JavaScript, anything you enter here, is page specific. So it only loads on this page. The global CSS, again, loads on every page. The global JavaScript loads on every page. But the layout, CSS, and JavaScript loads on just that page. This is incredibly powerful because this means you can add styling for just one page and you don't have the overhead of that loading on every other page where you're not using it. Again, the global JavaScript, you have all these global CSS and JavaScript that you can use, like this red background, that's available for you to use on every page that you're using Beaver Builder. So now that we understand the difference between the global CSS and the layout CSS, let's understand how this is working behind the scenes. So on this page, we noted if we go to Tools and then Global Settings and then CSS, we have this text highlight that is giving the red background with the white text and the padding, which is doing this. So if we publish these changes, obviously that CSS that we've added is going somewhere within our website. And it's actually going into a CSS file that is generated for this page. Now, we do get into this in a later lesson where we talk about caching. I go very in depth to talk about how the caching folder works, but we're just going to skim over it now because it is related. So what I want to do is I want to go into the cPanel to access the website files. You could also use your FTP if you want to follow along. And we're going to go to WP Content. And then we're going to go to Uploads, and then BB Plugin, and then Cache. So this page here, if we inspect element, we can see that this page has the ID of 676. And if we click Edit Page, we can confirm that because it's up here in the URL. It says post equals, and then the ID of this post, which is 676. And if we jump back to the Beaver Builder cache folder, we can notice that there's a few files in here. There's some pictures and the CSS and JavaScript, but you can see this has 676-layout and 676-layout.js. And what that means is that these relate to this page here. Now let's go ahead and inspect this .css file. So let's edit the code. So when you add modules and all these things to Beaver Builder for a page, Beaver Builder generates this CSS and this JavaScript file, and together they allow this page to render when your page is loaded. So each page has its own set of JavaScript and CSS files, and it will have the ID hyphen, and then layout, and then CSS and .js. So if we go down, so all of this code here, if we launch this with Beaver Builder, and then we've dragged in this row here, and then we've added this background image, this is actually generating some CSS code. So it's outputting the HTML for this row, but in the CSS, it's saying for this row, add this background image. And all of those rules get put into this page here. Now what we want to take away from this lesson is if we go right to the bottom, you can see text highlight, background color red, color white, padding 0.5. So what that means is as we're adding backgrounds and rows and margins and paddings and all these sort of things to build our page, this CSS is getting generated for this page, and then at the end, it's appending whatever we write into the global CSS box. So something that is important here, as we know, cascading style sheets, the last thing overwrites the previous. This is important that if you have some CSS up here that the page is generated, and then you add that CSS and override it into the global settings box, because the global settings CSS gets added to the end of that, it will overwrite what was in there previously. Okay, so that code that we add to the global settings box gets added to the CSS file for that specific page. Now let's go to the FAQs page and let's inspect element. And we can see that this page has the ID of 671. So let's look for 671. We'll just refresh this. So 671. So this CSS and JavaScript is responsible for building this page here. And let's edit this. So code edit and click edit. So as you can see, as we're dragging and dropping rows and modules and columns, adding background images, changing the fonts in the heading modules, all those sort of things are rendering the CSS up here. And then we can see the text highlight. So so text highlight, if we go back to this page and launch Beaver Builder, remember that is coming from our global settings. So there's our text highlight. And then after that is our text green. And that is coming from our layout settings, which is in Tools and Layout CSS. So what does that mean? That means that your layout CSS and JavaScript are loaded after your global settings CSS and JavaScript. And this is a very important point, because what that means is if we have the text highlight and we're doing a red background here, which is responsible for this here. So let's just click and we'll just confirm that that has a CSS class of text highlight. If we go to Tools and then our layout settings, and we add that exact same rule, but then we make it black and click Save and publish these changes, you can see that it isn't the red from the global settings, it's actually the black from the layout settings. And again, if we go back and we reload our cache, and then we inspect this CSS file for that particular page, we can see that we have text highlight red, but then we have text highlight black. This is the global, and this is the layout. So what does that mean? Again, that means that your layout CSS is loaded very last, and you can overwrite what's in your global settings with your layout settings. Now, you might sometimes do this if, just say you want to have a few CSS classes available to every page, you would put it into the global box. But then maybe for one page, you might want to make that black instead of the green like I just did, or the red. You would just go in and for that page, add your rules to the layout, and it would get loaded to the end of that CSS file. Now again, when you're building your pages, you might never really need to understand why this is all happening, but I guarantee you at some point, if you're doing more of the advanced development, it's going to be very beneficial to actually understand what I've taught in this lesson, because it allows you to be more flexible and know specifically where you should be putting your CSS. Because if you only wanted to make this text here have a specific style and you wanted to write some CSS to do that, you don't want to add that to the global settings box because, as I've just shown you, that's loaded on every page. So if you're trying to just style this text here that's only on this page, why would you want to load that CSS on every page? It's an overhead that will slow down your page unnecessarily. So just to style this page, you'd put it in the layout.css so that that CSS only loads on this page. And as I've mentioned, the JavaScript works exactly the same, but it'd be a bit redundant to go through and give you an example. It's just, I want to show you guys where it's all loading and how you can use it and leverage it to better understand where you should be putting your CSS and JavaScript when building your web pages. So that's it for this video. On to the next one.